for this month of July in Centers for Spiritual Living is open communication and inclusivity. Thus, the songs about rainbow and the invitation to be truly ourselves and to honor each other for the real inside essence of what we are. Last week in a 4th of July talk called A Pluribus Unum, I talked about the fact that our original model for this country, not company, out of many one, really was our core principle in Science of Mind of oneness, that out of many colonies, out of many states, we formed one strong federal government. Out of many peoples who immigrated here from all over, one American people. And yet that we kept our colors, we kept our true colors, if you will. There was an original sketch as part of our seal of a bouquet of flowers of different colors. So one bouquet coming together, but each individual flower. So there's unity and yet individuality and diversity, and celebrating that. There's only one thing going on this planet, in this universe, and that is spirit, that is God, the one life, as Scott so beautifully prayed about. I showed some slides last week of improbable friends, you know, those pictures of animals from different species that get real cuddly and soft, and I talked about how we might do a better job as one species communicating, connecting, making friends with people who are different views, different backgrounds, befriending them. And we talked about a wonderful idea from author Elizabeth Lesser, take the other to lunch. Take somebody to lunch who is a liberal if you're a conservative if you're liberal, and get to know them. Not talking politics, but you know what makes their heart sing, kind of like Scott read about in the invitation. What do you really want to know about that person? So continuing kind of a theme of animal lessons, since we started that last week, I had an experience that I thought was appropriate to the topic this week. I went down to the dumpster to take out my trash. Yeah, ministers have trash and go to the dumpster. Mundane thing. And I came across an older gentleman who was walking his dog and bringing trash to the dumpster as well. And I found myself, as I often do, this dog was a little Yorkie, fawning over the dog. Oh, cutie, good morning, how are you? You know, and petting her. She wasn't particularly well groomed. She was kind of scraggly looking, but you know, doggies, they're irresistible, right? And I went on and asked her name. Her name was Roxy. And when we finally parted, I said, you know, have a great day. And I thought about it afterwards.
You didn't even say hi to him.
I didn't ask his name. I didn't really acknowledge him, you know, and I thought, what is it? Anybody do that for the animals? I hope I'm not the only one.
With kids.
Kids, true, yeah. And I thought, you know, what is it? Why do I automatically get excited? And the other piece to that is when I had a dog, when I would walk her, you know, a dog's on this corner and a dog's on the other corner. The animals usually, some would bark, but usually it would be like, oh, a possible friend, you know, they'd want to meet each other. The whole world was possible friends. And I thought about, what is it? Why?
Possible friends.
And I thought, you know, animals are such unconditional love.
Yeah.
They don't judge us. They're not going to, you know, usually snub us. They're not going to be unfriendly. They're not going to hurt our feelings. They're just unconditional love. But again, I thought, let's take a lesson. And I made a vow next time that it's fine to fawn over the animals. But I will at least say, I'm Kimberly, good morning. What's your name?
I saw your tail wagging. I just had to say hello.
Oh, my. So the talk title this morning is Racism to Gracism. Interesting title. You know, what is Gracism? Well, let's talk about racism first. So when people deal with color, class, or culture in a negative way, we might say that's racism. It's so hard to imagine little kids doing that, huh? They don't care. And the answer, of course, isn't to ignore differences like we talked about. It's to recognize them, but to honor them. And instead, to look at color, class, and culture in a positive way. That is Gracism. So there's a book of the month this month, called Gracism, The Art of Inclusion by David A. Anderson. And you know, he talks about the term grace. It's not one that we use a whole lot, although we do talk about it in our foundations class. What is grace but the unconditional love of Spirit for us, the givingness of Spirit, the abundance of Spirit to us, wanting the highest and best for us. And it's not something we have to earn, it's given freely, right? So the idea of Gracism is for us to embrace the other, people who may look different, think different, have different backgrounds from us, but embrace them with that unconditional love, that unconditional respect, realizing and recognizing that they are one with us. We all come from the same Spirit. We are really all one. Gracism. Dogs practice Gracism pretty eloquently, I think. So our overall affirmation this month that was suggested as we tackle the same topic in centers across the globe for spiritual living, but we do it in a different, unique way, of course, because we're all unique. The affirmation is we communicate openly with each other in an atmosphere of collaboration and inclusion. Yeah. So, a Dot story from the book. This is a really interesting story. This was a social experiment, and the book opens with this. 10 people were going to a job interview, and before they went in, they each had painted on their cheek a red dot. And then they were going into the interview, and they were going to sit across from the interviewer, and when they came out, they were debriefed. And when they came out, all 10 interviewees complained or mentioned that the interviewer kept staring at that red dot on their cheek. The interesting thing is, only 5 of them actually had a red dot. 5 of them had a clear dot painted on their chin. It was not visible. But they all felt self-conscious. And so the lesson we got out of that is the places where we don't feel confident, where we feel self-conscious, our dots become an issue. And we can even imagine that people, not that sometimes people don't notice in a negative way, but we can imagine it. And those dots could be our weight, the shape of our bodies, our age, our race, hairedness or non-hairedness, as Jim points to his head. I mean, you know what your dots are. And the author points out that it's not just people of color or people that are on the older end of the spectrum or the younger end of the spectrum that have those dots. White men have the dot, because in our culture, especially in these days when we become more aware of how groups are excluded, white men sometimes get blamed for being racist or whatever. In other words, whenever we make stereotypes about a group, it's not fair, you know? So it's an interesting thing here. Yeah, the dots. The author writes, when you have groups of people in a country who feel like they have dots on their face and have been made to feel their dots are ugly, unwanted, and limiting to their success, you also find corresponding behaviors that contribute to their self-perceptions. Many with dots feel as if they must overachieve in order to succeed in society. I've met that with friends. Some feel that hope is lost and there's no reason to strive. Hopelessness can be a weapon of mass destruction. So interesting to be aware of our own dots and the potential dots of others. And let's embrace the dots, yes? The other story the author tells, this is David Anderson is a black Christian pastor. And he tells the story of driving around the Chicago suburbs one day, and he was stopped by the cops for no apparent reason.
Really?
And his first thought was it was because of his color. And he kind of pushed that out of his mind and decided not to pay attention to his dot. Well, it happened 3 more times the same day. And he realized that, yes, he had a dot, and that others were seeing it. Sad. It's a sad thing. So again, the answer to dotism that doesn't leave people feeling left out or discriminated or judged is to declare their innocence. And it's not to swear you never saw the dot, right? It's just to not judge, to be open-hearted, to be open-minded, to be like those doggies who, hey, I might get to know him or her, even though the species is different. Maybe they're a mutt, not a thoroughbred. They don't care. And neither should we about class, about race, and so on. So this is a theological response to racism, the author points out. Gracism. It's not, what do we call it when we hire people? Affirmative action. It's just affirmative perceptions, I think. There's another little story in the book a woman who had been taught about Gracism by the author wrote him an email. She was in an airport waiting to board a plane on Southwest Airways. Anybody ever fly Southwest? Mm-hmm. So you know the drill, right? You print your boarding pass as early as you can. You're in A, B, or C line, and you line up very carefully with the numbers, right? And you're quite aware of where you are and who's in front of you and in back of you. So this lady's waiting in line. She has an A boarding pass. And a family comes into the boarding area, speaking Spanish very loudly, kind of upset, confused. There's a mom and dad and 2 children. And they clearly don't know the rules here. And the people in the line, they don't say anything, but you can see people kind of getting closer and protecting their turf because they want to get on that plane, you know, before anybody. And the lady finds herself thinking similar thoughts, like, oh my gosh, they don't know what they're doing, I want to get on the plane. And then they start trying to edge into the A line. And things get a little tense. And then the woman who wrote the email said she got a God plop upside the head. What am I doing? What am I doing? If I were in a country where I didn't speak the language and I didn't know the customs, how would I feel? Of course they're confused and don't know. So she went up to the lady and tapped her and said, come get in line in front of me. And the lady didn't speak English, so at first she didn't get it, but she motioned to her. And eventually, big smiles, big gratitude, she came and got in front of her. I think that is an example of Gracism. And so sometimes it's not big deals, you know, that we have to do. It's just recognizing and being proactive for somebody who's different and maybe out of the loop, out of the mainstream. There's a beautiful story about our founder of Science of Mind, Ernest Holmes, some of you are probably familiar with. Early on, the third church to be chartered, to be licensed, was in East LA. And the reverend was a black man named Reverend Arthur Twine. He was African American. The Science of Mind magazine, the monthly magazine, used to publish a list of all of the centers, and they used to list them alphabetical by name. And East LA Church was listed third in the alphabetical list. Well, the East LA Church was very mixed racially. It was maybe half black, half white. And if you think about 1945, what the atmosphere was like then, segregation wasn't illegal. We had separate platoons for blacks and whites. We had separate drinking fountains and bathrooms in the South, right? And there was some murmuring and mumbling and discomfort about this. And so one of the magazines, the next issue that got published, took that center out of the main list, listed it separately with parentheses colored. You know, product of the time, right? Now we go, what? In Science of Mind? But, you know, we are also affected by the outer culture, what's going on. There are probably things we're doing today, you know. 40 years from now, people will say, what? So here's what our beloved founder did. Oh my goodness, did I forget? No, I got it. It's his speech, his little speech is in the Essential Earnest book that we studied. He asked his good friend, the minister, to allow him to speak on Sunday at East LA Church. And here's what he said to a hushed and packed crowd. I've been told that too many non-Caucasians attend these lectures. True, there are Caucasians and non-Caucasians, but this we must affirm. We are all children of one living God, one life that permeates all without exception, one intelligence that governs all, and most important, every man and woman who abides in the universe is a significant entity in the one universal consciousness. Our doors will forever be open to all. Whoever you are, be proud. You are a divine idea in the mind of God. The magazine immediately reverted to the way it had been. Somebody had briefly bowed to the segregationist tendencies of the day, only to be reminded that Ernest's teachings were anything but conventional or exclusive. Gracism, yes, that message to everybody there, including the non-Caucasians, as he put it, that they too were children of God. So that art of inclusion, you know, It makes sociological sense right now, too. We all have heard about our demographics and how they're shifting. Almost 40% of our American population is expected to be racial and ethnic minorities by 2050. The 2000 census found that non-Hispanic whites had dropped from 76 to 69%, and 3 out of 10 people in our country right now are members of a minority group. 6.8 million identified themselves as multiracial on our 2000 census. So I think some of the questions I'd like us to ask ourselves this week is, how can we build a bridge? Perhaps what are we communicating that keep people that are different away? Even in this community, I think it's a good question. We talked about how might we include kids. You know, how might we include more people that are different so we're more representative of the larger population? There's no simple solution here, but I think one of them is to smile, to make friends, to be open, and to just do some thinking about. You know, is there anything we're doing that's, I don't want to say cultish because we're not a cult, but you know, kind of like, are we a fraternity that's closed? Or are we open to anybody, no matter what their differences are? And then the question is, what are we missing by not having people of all colors, cultures, etc.? Because that is a very real thing. Just like with our children, you know, what a great time it was on Tuesday to connect and play and get from them, receive from them the gift of play and frivolity and laughter and all of that. Won't it be a great gift when our teens come back and we're going to have them speak the day they get back about what they learned? Yes. And then that opens the door for more teens because we're honoring the ones that are here, yes? How might we cultivate the multicultural soil, if you will? Knowing that no one is dispensable. Everyone is part of the body of God. There is no group on the planet that does not matter. So one more little tidbit that I enjoyed from the book was that the pastor was in England, and he noticed that elevators in England aren't called elevators. Do you know what they're called?
Lifts.
Lifts. And he, being a minister, of course, always thinking about metaphor, thought about lifting and uplifting and how might we uplift people, because that's really what Gracism is. It's uplifting those who might not in the moment feel uplifted. And there was another interesting lesson he learned. His community adopted a community within his own town that was kind of a depressed community. They also adopted a community in Kenya. And the original language around this program was to uplift them, but the language was that they were adopting them. And someone from the inner community in that inner city said, you know, you might want to think about using a different term, because adopting kind of sounds like patriarchal, or, you know, and so they decided instead of adopting to talk about partnering. So that they elicited ideas from both communities. How might we help you? And together they built those bridges. That was honoring. That was a gracist attitude. So what would happen if we were to release a force of encouragers, of uplifters, of gracists? If people were radically inclusive, like our four-legged friends, and eager to meet and to connect. Imagine people on the sidelines of popularity were actually valued, included, inspired to join the ranks of the celebrated. Their spirits of discouragement or depression or disillusionment, washing away the walls of separation, can shatter. And all of us are enriched as a result. I want to end with a poem by the beloved poet Maya Angelou. It's called A Brave and Startling Truth. We, this people on a small and lonely planet, traveling through casual space, past aloof stars, across the way of indifferent suns, to a destination where all signs tell us it is possible and imperative that we learn a brave and startling truth. And we come to it, to the day of peacemaking, when we release our fingers from fists of hostility and allow the pure air to cool our palms. We, this people on this small and drifting planet, whose hands can strike with such abandon that in a twinkling, life is sapped from the living. Yet, those same hands can touch with such healing, irresistible tenderness that the haughty neck is happy to bow and the proud back is glad to bend. Out of such chaos, of such contradiction, we learn that we're neither devils nor divines. When we come to it, we, this people, on this wayward floating body, created on this earth, of this earth, have the power to fashion for this earth a climate where every man and every woman can live freely without sanctimonious piety, without crippling fear. When we come to it, we must confess that we are the possible. We are the miraculous. The true wonder of this world. That is when, and only when, we come to it. So how do we remember this week that we are the possible? We are the miraculous. We are the true wonder of this world. Not just those who look like me and talk like me and dress like me, but all of us. All of us. Let's see what happens if we become gracious. As we go into prayer and invite our practitioners, if you're able to stand with me in consciousness.